Alright, so I pulled up a little video of Romanticism to kind of give you some background before we really dive into it.
Hi there, it's Dr. Bernstein, and this video is the first installment of a two-part series that is designed to introduce you to the Romantic period within American literature. This period is generally understood to have begun in 1836 with the publication of Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature, and generally considered to have drawn to a close in 1865 at the end of the Civil War. Now, obviously, literary periods are things that are mostly constructed in retrospect by future generations of scholars and thinkers who sort of look back and think, wow, during this time, look at these, ideas that so many different writers and thinkers were, having, or this particular style. Now, sometimes the writers themselves are self-consciously, thinking about themselves in relation to others, and they have this philosophy or literary style that they're really trying to cultivate. But a lot of times, these periods are constructed in retrospect, so different people have slightly different dates. But these are...
Do you understand what she's saying there in retrospect? So right now, there are things happening in the world, right, that are going to be historic events. We can't really, put a term on them or evaluate them until, in years from now, right, when we're looking at that event in historical perspective. So same thing with these time periods with the Age of Reason, with the Romantic era. It's not like they were like, oh, we're in the Romantic era. We're writing romantically, right? There was just this kind of thought, this general thinking that was cultivating and kind of building over time during this time period. And then scholars went back later and were like, okay, we're going to title this the Romantic period because it had similar instances and similar styles. That's what she means by that.
Are the most generally accepted dates, 1836 to 1865.
So 1800s, basically.
And within this 30-year time period, there were two major movements. The Transcendentalist movement, which most people think begins in 1836 and draws to a close in 1844, and the American Renaissance, which begins in 1850 and ends in 1855. So let me start by telling you a little bit about the Transcendentalist movement. The Transcendentalists placed a great deal of emphasis on the intuition, on our inner conscience, our inner sense of right and wrong, and reason with a capital R. One scholar points out that Transcendentalists believe that man can intuitively transcend, can intuitively rise above the limits of the senses and of logic and receive directly higher truths and greater knowledge denied to these more mundane methods of knowing.
Transcend,
so when you read Emerson's Self-Reliance, we're not going to be reading Emerson's Nature in our course, we're going to be reading Self-Reliance. But when you read Self-Reliance, which was published in 1841, you're going to see some of these core transcendentalist beliefs working themselves out in his writing, and issues that he's grappling with himself. And if I sort of condensed the Transcendentalist movement into the tiniest nutshell possible for this video, but you should also read the document, the supplemental document that I created and posted on our D2L site that provides you with much more detailed information about these concepts that I just mentioned. So if you're not in one of my classes, you can get in touch with me through my website and I can help you gain access to that document. The second movement that I want to tell you about is the American Renaissance. Again, that began in 1850, drew to a close in 1850.
Okay, with history, have we talked about Renaissance at all? No? Anyone know what a Renaissance is?
Last year we talked about Renaissance.
Okay, so what is it? What?
It's like the princesses and kings era.
The princesses and the kings what?
It's like the princesses and the kings era.
Oh, era. Okay, sorry. Yeah, but it's a word that means something in Carson.
Life.
Okay, close. Max.
Like a big change.
Okay, big change. Corbin.
Like a reformation.
Yeah, Reformation change, Hannah.
I was going to say kind of like an enlightenment.
Yeah, an enlightenment, right? They're kind of drawn to something new. It's like an enlightenment of some sort of... Did you have a definition?
The art period.
It's a big art period, right? It's a big focus on... Because what period were we just in? The age of what? Reason.
Yeah.
Right? We just talked about reason. There was a big emphasis. Remember Federalist number 10? All those readings we did, it was based on reason. Okay, now we're kind of going away from that and being like, arts. A lot of these movements are directly related to one another.
Renaissance is not really the best word to describe what's happening here because Renaissance means a rebirth. What's really happening during this time is the birth of American literature, the first major flourishing of American literature. Now, clearly, there were creative writers prior to the American Renaissance, but this is a time, a really concentrated 5-year period of time where a lot of the works that most people think of when they think of 19th century American literature or American literature, when these works were all published within this short period of time. So I'm talking about Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, Herman Melville's Moby Dick, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, Thoreau's Walden, and Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. So those are all very significant works of literature, and even more was published during this time by these authors and more. But this will sort of give you a sense of how the key texts were being published during that time. And it's interesting how it really wasn't until around 60 years after declaring independence that American writers began to become even more really self-consciously aware of a desire to create some sort of distinctive American literary style or some kind of distinctive American literature. And so while we're reading the works of Emerson and of Hawthorne and of Whitman, and perhaps even, if we have time, Harriet Beecher Stowe, I want you to think about, what, if anything, makes these works seem American to you. There's no one right or wrong answer.
Okay, so she's getting into something a little bit different that we don't need to go into. But what I want to point out is, did you see what she was saying about the fact that this is the first kind of time period where American literature was its own new thing? So that means different, right? We're going to see a big break in style and break in form, which we'll go over. Okay, history. Let's review it. So 1800 to 1865-ish was the time period that she discussed, right? Let's go to my headquarters. I don't have to do this. You can head over to history. Okay. Huge growth in the U.S. economy thanks to further separation from Great Britain, right? Okay, Great Britain. So we're our own country now, okay? We have a lot more financial stability, right, in our country. The Industrial Revolution, Logan, close the computer or I'm going to take it from you for the rest of the period. Okay, I don't want to tell you again. So it made it easier to settle and profit from native lands, and the country was able to manufacture a lot more products. Okay? Industrial Revolution. It happens everywhere, right? So we're putting up products, we're able to kind of not be as reliant on Great Britain to get things done. The original belief in the country, which was the agrarian system of belief that a simple life of the farmer is superior to complicated urban life of industrialism. Okay? So in this era, people really stuck to the agrarian system. So while the Industrial Revolution was happening, these writers in this area stuck to this, was that a simple life was better. Okay? So that's why people moved to replace wilderness entirely with cities and factories. Because there was such an emphasis on industrialism that people were moving to the cities, while this group was like, no, we want cities. Okay? American writers began to celebrate the ability of nature that has been untouched to change people who experience nature. Okay, so they it was like a calling. They wanted people to experience, like, the untouched greatness of nature. Right? They're like, get away from the city. Come up to Placerville. Basically, right?
Well, I hear
Yes. Okay, focus on this last point, Hannah. Romanticism developed as a need to find an authentic American voice. That is key, okay? It It was a different style that was uniquely American. All right. I already mentioned this once. It was a huge response to the Enlightenment. Okay? So, on the left, what was the Age of Reason? The Enlightenment, a period in the 18th century noted for belief in the ability of reason to discover truth, shape society, and shed light onto the darkness of ignorance, superstition, injustice, and tyranny. Okay? That period is when we had what type of writings? Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, what else, Ron? Legal documents in General Carson.
Federalist Papers.
Federalist number 10 and all the Federalist Papers? Yes, okay. So that was what that focus was on. Now we're shifting. The Romantics rebelled against the Enlightenment's focus on reason, okay? They didn't want to hear all that logical stuff. There's a huge emphasis on science and logic over faith, all right, in the Age of Reason. So do you think the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason was a response to their early emphasis on faith? I want you to think about that. So, we know the Age of Reason here, right, was a focus on logic in order to get things done, okay, as a response to tyranny, government, things like that. So if all of these periods are responses to the one before them, what do you think was the emphasis before the Age of Reason? Huh? Religion. Yeah. It was a big period on faith, okay, on religion, because who came over from Britain on the Mayflower? Okay. I can't hear you, Ron. Protestants, okay. There was, what were they called specifically? Pilgrims, okay. So the Pilgrims came over and everything was directed by faith. And then the Age of Reason came on, where it became a focus on reason and emphasis, not faith. Now we move to the American Romantic period. Now we have an emphasis, self-reliance, nature, okay? It's a direct response to the Age of Reason. Characteristics of Romanticism, okay? What's a characteristic? Let's just make sure we all know what that means. Like a trait, okay, Katie, what'd you say? A trait as well. Okay, so think of me, like what is one of my traits?
Enthusiastic.
Okay, enthusiastic. Either. Characteristics. Friendly, super pregnant, okay. Dog lover maybe, I don't know. Alright, those are all my characteristics, okay. So if we look at Romanticism, these are the traits of Romanticism, the things that make it purely romantic, okay. So Romantics value feelings and intuition more than rational thought. So if you put heart over reason, you're probably a little more romantic in nature. So imagination, okay, they believed it was the active part of the soul. Intuition. Do we know what intuition means?
Like a gut feeling.
Yes. Okay. Idealism, striving for a perfect utopian world. What does utopian mean? Not a dystopian world. Okay, it's a perfect world that does not exist, right? They don't exist, and that's why books always talk about dystopia, right? There is some utopian literature, but it's not as fun, I promise. All right, so they were striving for this world. They were idealists. Inspiration, intuitive but accurate force, supernatural. Okay, that's what I want you to think about. It stimulates creative activity. So what kind of things inspired them? They were intuitive, but they thought it was accurate, like it was someone talking to them. Okay? Individuality, finding the unique voice of Americans, and they valued individual freedom. Okay? So, for example, in the Age of Reason, they used a lot of essays, right? In order to make their point. They would write essays and publish them and things like that. Do you think a lot of essays, do you think essays were the only form used? No. Okay? Individual freedom. So no longer did we kind of conform to certain essays. We now have many different types of getting our point across. All right. The big one is the emphasis on nature. Okay? Romantics stressed the awe of nature in art and language. Okay? So they felt they had a special connection with nature. They rejected the rationalization of nature by the previous thinkers. So they rejected, they did not believe in the rational thinking in the previous period. Are some of you connecting with this period a little more? Okay, that's what I thought. They viewed nature as a healing power, nature as a source of subject and image, nature as a refuge from the artificial constructs of civilization. Right? That's kind of a big belief even in today's world. It's like, get out, go on a walk, right? It's kind of the same thing where it's, obviously this is we live in a much less, this is a lot more extreme, the romantic area, right? Okay, transcendentalists. Remember from the video what you talked about? This was a smaller portion of the period in general. Does anyone remember what specifically the transcendentalist movement she kind of talked about? Remember transcend? I did say it was a keyword. Hold on, from?
People valuing, like, individual expression over religion.
And intuition, okay. We'll go through it again real quick. So look at the graphic. Okay, the word transcend means to go beyond a limit or range, for example, of thought or belief. Okay? So to go beyond your limit. I think of like a ghost almost, like souls, right? Like that's what pops into my mind is like if you're a ghost, you're transcending your physical body, right? You're kind of moving beyond that limit. And I'm not saying ghosts are real or not real, but that's what I think of. I think of like Casper. Okay? Transcendentalism, at its core, is about moving beyond a common experience and understanding. Okay? So they thought they were all like yogis in this time period, and their minds were kind of moving beyond their physical capabilities. What'd you say? Like people who do yoga a lot, who like meditate all day. That's what I was going for. I was imagining like a room full of people meditating for hours. That's what I would imagine this group to
That made
be
me
like.
think of like that vine with like the cringe screaming.
Like this. He's
Yeah.
like this. He's got the furry fingers.
Yeah, and he's like screaming.
I'll start screaming at you guys to get my point across. Hey, group within! Alright. So the Transcendentalists, it was a group within Romanticism. Okay, they still believed all the same tenets for the most part. Alright, but it began in New England, in a highly religious area of the country. So that's where the Pilgrims came over. Okay, we have a lot of Protestant groups and things like that forming in that area. They were non-conformists who rebelled against the importance of religion over individual expression. Okay? That means they valued individual expression over religion. Okay? Individual expression is key. Non-conformist, what does that mean? Somebody who does or does not conform to society standards. Which one? Does not conform. Okay? They also had a role in both abolition, which is what? Do we know what that word means? Slavery. Okay? They had a role in the freeing of slavery and women's rights, and they wrote pieces for both. Okay? So if society valued slavery and men's rights over women's rights, they were nonconformists in those areas. Right? They were civil rights leaders of that time period. Alright. These ones are kind of crazy. This is where they get kind of loopy. Alright? Specifically with one. The universal soul. So the Transcendentalists believe that each person carries the universe in their soul, and the universe lives within us. Okay? I'll say that again. Each person carries the universe in their own soul and lives within us. So we have the ability to express the world and have a connection with the universe. Each individual. Okay? That was their core belief. Intuitive thought, ability to know something through feeling. Same thing as romantics. Okay? Self-reliance. Alright? These guys were more self-reliant physically than romantics in general. This dude, Ralph Waldo Emerson, lived in a cabin in the woods by himself for 2 years in order to connect with nature. Okay? Now this is the fun group. This is the dark romantics. Okay? This is Edgar Allan Poe. This is all those fancy fellas. Okay? These writers preferred the dark side of nature. They are still romantic because they focus on gothic elements like creepy symbols, horrific themes, and psychological guilt and I didn't phrase that right. in the psychological guilt of sin. Okay? So, in The Telltale Heart, right, by Edgar Allan Poe. If I kill a dude, put his body beneath the floorboard, okay? He can hear the heart beating beneath the floorboard, right? And he's going crazy. He can't actually hear that heart. So what the Dark Romantics were kind of doing was saying, like, there's a psychological torture if we sin or if we commit a crime. And that's really what they focused on, was like the psychological just torture, all right? These elements, just like ghost stories, are still a reaction to the reliance on reason, right? If I believe in ghosts, that's not a scientific fact, right? There hasn't been many studies that focus on the proof of ghosts, right? Okay. That's why they're still romantic in nature. Now, for this unit, guess what you're doing? You're writing your own narrative, okay? And if you want, you can make it a dark romantic theme. So you can literally write a horror story if you want to. That's an option.
That's her truth.
Katie, I'm making your dreams come true today. Alright? Here are the elements. Here are the key points. Alright? Now, a big thing this unit is going to do, I want you to be able to notice a romantic piece. Okay, I want you to be able to be like, okay, this is romantic because of A, B, and C. That's one of my goals for you. Okay, that's why we're going over these. Dark romantics present individuals as prone to sin and self-destruction, not as inherently possessing divinity and wisdom. Okay? So, humans in nature are prone to sin, right? We're prone to self-destruction. That's what the dark romantics believe. The natural world is dark, decaying, and mysterious. When it does reveal truth to man, its revelations are evil and hellish. Okay? So when the earth, or when our society is revealing truth, the truth is that it's evil and hellish. Okay? Dark romanticism frequently shows individuals failing in their attempts to make changes for the better. Could this be the start of the horror genre? Likely. Okay? Was these guys' thoughts on humanity and things like that. So we'll go through some readings of these that focuses on psychological torture, right? On guilt. What else did it focus on? What's the sin? What did we just talk about? What? Self-destruction. What else? I think it was some things that dark romantics did. Sienna? Prone to sin. We're prone to sin. Yeah, Katie. Guilt and sin, Ronnie. What was one thing that the dark romantics believed? Yeah, the world is mysterious. Yes, good. Okay. All right. So part one of the unit, Katie. The first part, what we're going to go over, is how did the Romantics define their American identity? All right. So in the beginning of this unit, we're going to kind of go into what made this group different and what made it unique to Americans in general. Okay. Second part, how do the Dark Romantics fit into this category? Okay, because some of you are kind of like, this is creepy, I don't want to do this, right? Carson, maybe. I feel like I'm like, I want to do this! Rowan and Hannah.
You think I'm just a sissy?
No, but I feel like this, you'd be like, I don't want to do that.
I mean, it's just kind of weird.
It is. And it's weird how it fits in. Wait till we get to the stories, too. It's like, what is wrong with these people?
I don't really like horror movies.
It's not like horror, don't worry.
And he saw it, he's like, it was a horror movie, why would you make me watch it? I'm like, it's not that scary. He's like, it's so scary.
I told
Okay,
you, the last
his dreams become a reality. His nightmares become his
the
reality.
last scary movie that I saw was Paranormal Activity in 2010. So.
I just want to see it. That's it.
I'm gonna go see
No, I'm so scared of clowns. No. 175. All right. Anyone want to read, or should I just read the whole thing?
Wait. Could you zoom in? If you zoom, I'll read.
Wait, what page did you say it was?
175.
I can't read that. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll read it. A distinctly American voice. In the first half of the 19th century, a distinctly American voice emerged as the United States reaffirmed its independence from Britain politically and economically. Because what was happening in that time period? America, right? Okay. The country was expanding geographically, creating diversification in the ways that people worked and lived. Reflecting the optimism of a growing country, writers developed a national literature, speaking for the first time in their own unique voices, rather than imitating what those in Europe were doing, right? Okay, an era of growth and change. In 1812, simmering tensions between the U.S. and Great Britain erupted in a 2-year war. Victory in the War of 1812 cemented the reality of American independence. It is sometimes referred to as the Second War for American Independence and brought great changes to life in the U.S. Because the war interrupted trade, Americans had to produce many of the goods they'd imported in the past. This period marked the beginning of the Industrial Revolution as the country shifted from its largely agrarian economy to become an industrial powerhouse. Remember how we talked about that? What did agrarian mean? Yes, you like the simple life rather than the industrial, okay? And we were leaving that to become an industrial powerhouse, but the Romantic writers were like, no, we want simple. The growth of the factory system brought many people from farms into cities where they worked long hours for low wages, often under harsh conditions. Writers of the period reacted to the negative effects of industrialization, the commercialism, hectic pace, and lack of conscience, by turning to nature and to the self for simplicity, truth, and beauty. We're kind of seeing, if we look at today's climate, especially in politics, right, it's kind of similar because there's a group of people that are kind of in protest of capitalism right now, right? There's a big movement away, him's like, yes. There's a big movement away from capitalism, right, where people are like human value versus money. Okay, this was also similar in that time period. At the same time, following the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, the country experienced change of another kind as settlers moved farther and further west. As European settlers moved into new territory to make money and gain land, Native Americans who had lived there for generations were displaced. We went over this, correct? The Indian Removal Act of 1830, for instance, required Native Americans in southeastern regions to relocate west of the Mississippi. Indians who tried to remain in their homelands were often brutally pushed. Okay, we read poems about that experience in New Orleans. In the middle of the century, Americans embraced the idea of manifest destiny, a belief that the U.S. was destined to expand to the Pacific Ocean and into Mexican territory. The U.S.'s annexation of Texas from Mexico in 1845 set off the Mexican-American War. Through treaties and later land purchases from the Mexican government, the U.S. established the current borders of the 48 contingent states. Okay. American writers of this period were influenced by European Romanticism, but soon adapted it to their own culture. The Romantics reacted to what had come before, including both the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and also the strict doctrines of Puritanism from the Pilgrims. Okay? Romantics were inspired by nature and celebrated the individual human spirit, including the emotions and imagination. An early Romantic, Washington Irving, was the first truly American writer who was recognized abroad as a pioneer of the short story form. He influenced later writers such as Nathaniel Hawthorne. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a New England writer, nurtured the pride that Americans took in their emerging culture. He led a group focused on transcendentalism, a philosophical and literary movement that emphasized living a simple life and celebrating the truth found in nature and in personal emotion and imagination. Emerson gave this European philosophy a uniquely American spin. He said that every individual is capable of discovering the higher truth on his or her own through intuition. Remember that whole soul thing? Unlike the Puritans, the Transcendentalists believed that people were inherently good and should follow their own beliefs. However different that these beliefs may be from the norm. In 1842, Emerson called for the emergence of a poet worthy of the new America, a fresh voice with limitless passion and originality. Two poets who began writing in the middle of the century arguably met this challenge, Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson. Although their lives outwardly were very dissimilar, both Whitman and Dickinson wrote poems that broke with the traditional conventions of poetic form and content. If you did not hear me, I'm going to say that again. Both Whitman and Dickinson wrote poems that broke the traditional conventions of poetic form and content. Okay? They were different. They were not writing haikus. Alright? They were new forms. In this way, they followed the transcendentalist belief, or ideals of individuals discovering the truth through intuition and following their own beliefs. Not all American romantics were optimistic. Okay, we had Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, or what have been called brooding romantics or anti-transcendentalists. Their stories are characterized by a probing of the inner life of their characters and examination of the complex and often mysterious forces that motivate human behavior. These stories are romantic still, okay, they're still romantic, and their emphasis on emotion, nature, the individual, and the unusual. Okay? They're not backed by reason. It's a bunch of weird stuff. Okay? So, you have like 5 minutes. What you should do now, go back to your document. These are your directions. After reading and listening to information about Romanticism, what is your understanding of this concept? What do you know about American Romanticism? What is this era? Okay. On the lines below, write in your own words a definition for American Romanticism. Okay, once you're done, submit that. You're done submitting. If you have not brought me back The Great Gatsby, you need to. Okay?
You have a list of 11.
I'll do it today, actually. I have one picture here. Also, while I have you guys here, still recording this, so that's fine. I'm grading your essays tomorrow, okay? If you want to redo your essay, if you want to make adjustments, you need to schedule a writing conference with me. The only way you will be allowed to redo your essays is if you schedule a writing conference, okay? So I'm going to email out a Google document of different time slots. Fill in the time slot you want if you want to redo your essay. Okay? That essay will be due Sunday night at midnight. This weekend. Yes. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes, you can redo anything you want to. You got a 95 and 100. Okay? What do you want?
So we can't do it.
No, I'm not going to redo it and you're going to get math. No. You can really only improve if you make changes, right? Unless you make weird changes. That's why we're in a conference. That's why I'm not like, here, take my feedback, try to assume it's correct, and then do it on your own. Okay? So I'll put it for 4th period, 3rd period on...
Wait, have you already started grading them?
No, because I grade seniors. I'll grade them fine. Okay? Are you anxious?
Yeah, because
I don't want
it's going to be a really great